Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Don't go to your wife in the maternity hospital. Don't embarrass yourself. It's not your son. A gypsy woman grabbed the hand of the delighted rich man rushing to pick up his wife. Initially, the rich man didn't believe her, but after secretly doing a DNA test, Adrian Navarro was rushing to his wife's labor. The weather seemed to have rebelled that evening, doing everything to prevent him from reaching the maternity hospital on time. The wind howled, tearing off the remaining leaves from the branches, rain poured mercilessly, and the gloomy sky was intermittently sliced by terrifying flashes of lightning followed by thunder. Adrian was nervous, gripping the steering wheel. The road was slippery, and the car slightly skidded at the turns. Suddenly, as he was nearing the city, the engine started to malfunction, the car slowed down, and soon the engine died completely. Adrian pulled over to the side of the road, cursing to himself. Checking his watch, he realized he had no time for repairs. He needed to get to the maternity hospital urgently. He jumped out of the car into the rain and ran along the road. A few minutes later, he saw a taxi slowly approaching him. Adrian desperately waved his hand, trying to catch the driver's attention. The taxi driver slowed down, rolled down the window. "What happened?" he asked. "My wife is giving birth. I need to get to the maternity hospital urgently." Adrian yelled over the noise of the rain. The driver nodded understandingly and opened the back door. The passenger jumped inside, and the taxi took off. The driver turned the wipers on full power, trying to see the road through the streams of water. "Hold on, buddy," said the taxi driver. "We'll try to make it." "What a night your wife picked to give birth, huh?" "What's wrong with this night?" the passenger inquired. "Come on," whistled the driver. "You really out of the loop? It's Halloween, the eve of All Saints' Day. You know, I don't want to scare you, but people tell creepy stories about this night." "Sorry, but I don't believe in those tales," Adrian replied warily, taking the taxi driver for another city madman who believed in a universal conspiracy and alien invasions. The car sped along the wet road, avoiding puddles and potholes. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack, and the car tilted to the right, a tire burst, and the vehicle swerved. "Damn!" exclaimed the driver, trying to maintain control of the car. They stopped in the middle of the road. Adrian looked at his watch and realized that time was running out. They couldn't stay here. "Let me help you change the tire," Adrian offered. Just then, a silhouette detached itself from the darkness, approaching the travelers in the light of the headlights. When the figure aligned with them, it turned out to be a woman looking like a bum, very much like a gypsy, covered with a plain raincoat. She grabbed Adrian by the hand and persistently repeated that his wife was giving birth to someone else's child. "Don't embarrass yourself, my golden boy. It won't be your son. Not yours. How do you know my wife is giving birth right now?" Adrian was surprised, not believing in the reality of the situation. The bum-looking gypsy woman stared intently at Adrian with her deeply set eyes, reflecting the headlights. Her voice sounded mysterious and ominous. "I see many things, boy. I saw your wife meet another man. I saw them having a good time together while you were busy. I saw a new life begin, but not from you." Adrian tried to pull his hand away, but the woman held it tightly, displaying incredible strength for her frail body. "Don't believe her," the taxi driver intervened, seeing Adrian's confusion. "She's just some crazy woman." But the woman's words echoed in Adrian's head. He knew that his relationship with his wife had been tense in recent months. She often went out in the evenings, claiming to meet friends, but he never suspected there could be another reason. "No. I must know the truth," Adrian said to the fortune teller. "If you're telling the truth, prove it. Tell me something that only my wife knows." The woman smirked and released Adrian's hand. "All right," she said. "Your wife wears a necklace with a large black pearl, supposedly given to her by her sister. In reality, it's a gift from her lover. She never takes it off. Also, she has a small lotus flower tattoo on her left shoulder. Is that enough for you to believe me?" Adrian's breath caught. The old woman had accurately described details that were unlikely to be public knowledge. Doubts grew in his mind, but before he could say anything, the gypsy turned and seemed to disappear into the darkness, dissolving among the trees. "Hey, man, stop staring. Let's change the tire instead," the driver's voice snapped him out of his stupor. Together, they quickly replaced the burst tire with a spare. Adrian got back into the taxi, feeling utterly lost. He sat silently, staring out the window as the car continued toward the maternity hospital. Thoughts swirled in his head about what lay ahead. Would this child really be his, or was it the result of infidelity? On the way to the maternity hospital, thoughts of his wife, another man. No, it couldn't be. They were happy together, planning for the future, dreaming of a child. But then why was this woman so confident about it all? The driver turned the wipers on full power, but they barely coped with the streams of water battering the windshield. The road was almost invisible, and he nearly veered into a ditch several times. With each kilometer, the tension increased as it was still a good half-hour drive to the maternity hospital. Then suddenly, ahead, a silhouette of a broken tree blocking the road appeared. The driver slammed on the brakes, but the car continued to slide along the wet asphalt. Adrian's heart pounded furiously in his chest as he realized that a collision was inevitable. At the last moment, the driver turned the wheel, and the car stopped just a few centimeters from the trunk. Climbing out, Adrian saw that the path was completely blocked. There was no sense in going back either. The road there was even worse. "Sorry, buddy, but I can't leave my car here. I'll call a tow truck. You've got about a 20-minute walk straight through the woods from here. Just go straight, don't turn anywhere." "Here, this is the only thing I can help with," said the taxi driver, handing him a flashlight. Adrian had no choice. He had to walk through the woods on foot. He quickly thanked the taxi driver, turned on the flashlight, and moved forward through the chaotic turmoil of nature towards the unknown. He walked for quite a while, at least, it seemed so to him, sometimes tripping over tree roots and sinking into the mud. Finally, the lights of the city began to glimmer ahead. They were close now. Then, a terrible crack sounded. A tree next to him fell, blocking the path. Adrian froze for a moment, but then gathered his strength and started looking for a way around. By the time he finally reached the maternity hospital, he was nearly out of strength. He limped to the entrance of the maternity ward. Thousands of thoughts swirled in his head. Should I tell my wife about the encounter with that strange woman or wait and find out everything myself? He pondered, while water streamed from his drenched clothes. Adrian stood there, stunned by the gypsy's words, hesitant to approach the doors of the maternity ward. The wind mixed with the rain mercilessly lashed his face, his heart thumped wildly, and his mind refused to accept what he had heard. A couple of minutes later, Adrian suddenly received a text message. "If you want the information that your wife is giving birth to another man's child to not reach your parents' ears, then transfer Cozy Country House. Autumn, says thoughtful, background blurred, thoughtful works in the garden, says passionate, looks thoughtfully, worried, walks joyful, says interested, $500,000 to the specified electronic wallet account." The account is anonymous, so don't waste time figuring out who it belongs to. Don't even think about contacting the police, otherwise, we will make this information public, and your family's business reputation will seriously suffer. Adrian froze in confusion. His wealthy parents were indeed eagerly awaiting a grandson. They insisted, with painful fanaticism, that their son must have an heir as soon as possible, otherwise, they threatened to pass their wealth to someone else. But now, standing in front of the maternity hospital, Adrian felt a strange emptiness inside. Of course, the birth of a child is a huge joyful event. But the thought that his son would merely be a means to secure an inheritance had troubled him before. He remembered how his parents constantly reminded him of this, as if it were some business transaction and not his personal life. Of course, Adrian tried to resist such pressure from his parents, but the idea of suddenly being without means of subsistence was not at all enticing, so his resistance was not very active. "You're trying to manipulate me and in fact decide for me when I should have children," he once declared to them. "But this should be a decision my wife and I make voluntarily, not under duress." I don't think your wife shares the paradise's sweetest with a loved one, even in a shack stance, his father dryly replied to such a statement. At that point, his son's rebellion was suppressed, and no further attempts were made to assert his rights. And now he was stunned by even more horrifying news. The long-awaited son might not even be his, and he was being blackmailed with this information. Adrian felt his world crumbling around him. All dreams of a happy family, all hopes for the future were under threat. He was terrified to imagine what would happen if his parents learned this news. He knew how strict and demanding they were, especially when it came to the family's reputation. But what was worse, he had no idea what to do about the blackmailer. Someone knew the whole truth and wanted to use it. Adrian realized he had two options: to pay and hope that would be enough, or to try to figure it out on his own. He decided to act, rather than immediately transferring the money. He began searching for information about who could be behind it all. Could it be someone his wife knew? His parents had given him an ultimatum: if he did not provide a male heir by the time he turned 30, they would take away all his money and the family business. Adrian sat in his father's office, listening to his stern voice. His father spoke slowly, as if weighing each word. "Son, we want you to understand one thing. We're doing this for you. The business needs to go into reliable hands, and the sooner you give us a grandson, the better. If you can't continue our family line, then we'll be forced to pass the business on to someone else." Adrian looked at his father, trying to understand what lay behind those words. He knew his father had always been a harsh man, but this demand seemed excessive. Nevertheless, he understood that arguing was futile. His parents had already made their decision, and it was final. He didn't realize that such haste had another hidden meaning. This way, they wanted to stimulate him to reproduce quickly. "Son, the thing is, when your grandfather fell ill, we reconsidered our attitude towards health and want to make sure in our lifetime that our line will successfully continue," his mother explained her insistence. "And since you're not a boy anymore, there's no time to waste. And this isn't just our whim. Doctors say that healthy offspring only come before 30, and then the risk of hereditary diseases increases with age. Every year, we're losing more and more chances to have a healthy grandson and a successor to our line. Do you understand this?" Adrian simply couldn't comprehend that his parents viewed him as a breeding bull for producing healthy offspring. Returning home, Adrian thought long about the situation. He loved his wife and did not want to hurt her, but he needed to somehow tell her about this, explain why they needed to hurry with children. But what if she finds out about the threats from his parents, he pondered. How will she react? And can he even become a father within the allotted time? Several months passed. Adrian and his wife tried to have a child, but unsuccessfully. Doctors said the chances were slim due to genetic incompatibility. No more than 10% of couples are identified with infertility, but you were unlucky to be among them, the doctor explained. Every day was a trial for them. Adrian's wife saw how nervous and stressed he was and tried to support him, but the tension between them grew. And one night, lying in bed, Adrian heard his wife's quiet sobs. He pulled her closer and asked, "What's wrong?" She sobbed and replied, "I can't take this anymore. It feels like we're in some sort of race or competition to conceive a child. Your mother told me everything. Why didn't you say anything?" Adrian fell silent, not knowing what to answer. He felt guilty before her, but was afraid to confess his fears. "Forgive me," he finally said. "I didn't want to upset you. I hoped I could handle it myself." They talked long into the night, discussing possible options. His wife suggested consulting with reproductive technology specialists, but Adrian was hesitant. He wasn't sure he was ready for such a step. Meanwhile, the deadline set by his parents was approaching. Adrian began to feel pressure from all sides. His relationship with his wife became increasingly tense. Eventually, he decided to talk to his father. His father listened silently, then said, "You have to make a decision, son. Either you do what we ask, or we will find another heir. The choice is yours." Adrian left the office feeling shattered. He returned home and found his wife sitting in the kitchen. She looked at him with hope and anxiety in her eyes. "Let's try the specialists," he said. "We'll do everything we can." Thus began a new chapter in their lives. They turned to the best doctors, underwent numerous procedures and tests. Time passed, and each month brought new disappointments, but they did not give up. Finally, after many months of waiting, the doctor gave them joyful news: "Congratulations. The test is positive, your wife is pregnant." Joy filled their hearts, but many challenges lay ahead. Now, Adrian remembered that day with horror, trying to understand what had actually happened. If the child is not mine, then everything they went through was a complete lie. And all this time, Maria was just pretending. Perhaps, hearing about the possibility of being disinherited, she feared being left with nothing and decided to secure herself. "Maybe I am infertile, or there are other reasons why we couldn't conceive a child even with special procedures in the clinic." While this hellish confusion brewed in Adrian's head, his wife Maria was in the throes of labor with an unknown man's son. The childbirth was a severe trial for his wife. Despite what he had heard, Adrian felt sorry for her. He wanted to believe that this was just someone's cruel prank or a mistake. The ominous silence surrounding him was broken by a phone call. An unfamiliar male voice came through the receiver. "Adrian? This is a doctor from the maternity department. Your wife has given birth, but the delivery was very difficult, and she is now in intensive care. The baby is in an incubator. He has lung problems." Adrian felt as if the ground was slipping away beneath his feet. All thoughts of Maria's infidelity vanished, replaced by overwhelming concern for her and their newborn son. His head spun, his heart thudded in his throat, but he forced himself to focus and asked, "How is she? What's wrong with her?" The doctor's voice sounded muffled. "She's in stable condition, but she'll need time to recover. Right now, her health is what's most important. We're doing everything we can." "And the baby? You said he has lung problems?" "Yes, the baby was born prematurely, so we've placed him in the intensive care unit. He needs special conditions to support his breathing. It's too early to make any predictions, but we hope for the best." Adrian thanked the doctor and hung up the phone. He felt drained and bewildered. Everything around him seemed unreal. Just yesterday, he was thinking about how he would care for Maria and the child, planning for the future. And today, life had taken such a cruel turn. What kind of bad luck is this? Has someone cursed or jinxed me? He wondered. I should have asked that gypsy about it. That devil's spawn definitely knows about these things. Adrian froze in place. He simply couldn't bear the weight of all the news that had fallen upon him. His heart clenched with pain and fear. He couldn't believe how things had turned out, his wife in intensive care, his child with breathing problems. It was too much to handle in one day. He rushed to the door of the maternity ward, where he had been standing all this time. Nurses led him to a large panoramic window, where he could see his newborn son. The baby lay in an incubator, connected to life support machines. His tiny body looked so fragile and vulnerable. Adrian stood there, not taking his eyes off, trying to memorize every detail. After a while, the doctor came over and explained the situation. Your son was born with underdeveloped lungs, so we've placed him in the unit. He's receiving the necessary support, but it will take time to assess whether a pathological process will develop. Your wife is also in intensive care. The childbirth was difficult, and she will need more time to recover. Adrian nodded, understanding that it was important to stay calm. He thanked the doctor and wanted to go to intensive care to find out about his wife's condition, but he was not allowed to go there. Adrian, unfortunately, we can't let you see your wife. She is unconscious, connected to monitors and tubes, so you won't be able to see her today, the doctor said. Adrian nodded understandingly and left the hospital building. The next day, he tried again to get into intensive care. This time, they let him in. His wife lay on the hospital bed, but he barely recognized her. She looked so exhausted. Maria was in critical condition. Adrian cautiously approached the bed. Her face was pale, her facial features unnaturally sharp, and her eyes were closed. The monitor next to her showed stable but weak vital signs. Slowly moving closer, Adrian gently touched his wife's hand. Her skin was dry and cold. "Maria," he whispered, "I'm here, right beside you. Everything will be all right. You'll see. Soon, you and the baby will be discharged, and we'll all be home together." Her eyelids twitched, but her eyes remained closed. It seemed like she could hear him, but she didn't have the strength to open her eyes. A lump formed in Adrian's throat, and he barely held back tears. He couldn't believe that just a day ago she was full of life and energy, and now she lay here unconscious, fighting for every second of existence. "Maria, can you hear me?" her husband asked, leaning closer to her, gently stroking her hair. Her eyelids trembled, and after a couple of seconds, she finally opened her eyes. "Ah, Adrian, is that you?" she whispered faintly. "Yes, dear." "Who else did you expect to see?" her husband asked. "No," she mumbled incoherently. "It's good that you came. I need to talk to you. Listen, I feel very bad right now and I don't know if I can pull through. I can't carry this burden any longer. I need to unburden my soul." "Shoo," he placed his finger on her lips. "You shouldn't talk much now. Let's talk later, when you've regained some strength." "No. I had a terrible dream, and it kept repeating itself over and over, seemingly endlessly. It's real torture. I can't stand it anymore. I have to tell you. I'm sorry, but I never loved you. I married you only for your money. And this child is not yours either. Forgive me, please, if you can." Adrian stood by his wife's bed, stunned by her words. Everything inside him seemed to break. He couldn't believe he was hearing this from the woman he considered his love, his family. The world around him seemed to turn upside down. "How could you?" he barely managed to utter, feeling his throat constrict with pain. She looked at him with a vacant stare, as if she no longer saw him. "I wanted to secure a comfortable future for myself, but I can't do this anymore," she said coldly. "I can't live in a lie anymore, so forgive me and goodbye. Now that you know the truth, there's no point in pretending to have a family relationship." These words sounded like a sentence. Adrian stood, unable to move. Everything he had built, everything he believed in, turned out to be a lie. He walked out of the maternity ward, not feeling his own legs. The wind mercilessly blew against him, throwing fallen leaves and small branches in his face, but Adrian paid no attention and continued to wander aimlessly. His mind was in total chaos. Step by step, he moved away from the maternity ward, not noticing where he was going. The world around seemed to cease to exist, and the only sound he heard was the beating of his own heart. Tears ran down his cheeks, mixing with raindrops. "It's all not true," he repeated to himself, trying to convince himself that it was all just a terrible dream. "It simply can't be true. She said that just to push me away. Maybe someone is blackmailing her too? They forced her to say all this, threatening her. There's no other explanation." But every memory of the past few months, every detail of his conversations with his wife, brought him back to the harsh reality. He walked without choosing a path, allowing the wind to lead him like a kite. The city lights flickered in his eyes, merging into one large blur. Gradually, he found himself on the outskirts of the city, where the streets became empty and the houses sparse. Eventually, Adrian found himself at an abandoned construction site. Huge concrete structures towered over him like giant guardians. Here, among the debris and rusty machinery, he fell to his knees, covering his face with his hands. Pain, anger, and despair overwhelmed his soul and engulfed him completely. "For what?" he cried out into the void. "Why is this happening to me?" No answer came. Only the wind continued to howl, carrying his scream into the surroundings. Adrian stood in the middle of the dark construction site, surrounded by the elements that seemed to reflect his inner turmoil. Anger, fear, despair, all these emotions mixed within him, creating an unbearable weight. The wind continued to tear leaves from the trees, throwing them at his feet, as if to remind him of the futility of all efforts. Adrian covered his face with his hands, trying to cope with the overwhelming emotions. But inside him, a storm raged that could not be stopped. Images of the past flashed before his eyes, happy moments with Maria, dreams of the future that now seemed shattered. Why is fate so cruel? Why did I have to go through such a trial? He continued to scream into the void. But at that moment, something clicked inside him. Adrian realized that no one would give him an answer. It was pointless to wait for some sign from the heavens. No miracle would happen. He had to decide for himself how to live on. His mind was in turmoil. How to find those who informed me of the infidelity? Who was that strange gypsy I encountered on the way, and how did she know the child wasn't mine? Adrian trudged further down the street, immersed in his gloomy thoughts, his head aching from tension, and he could not collect his thoughts. Questions swarmed in his mind like a hive of bees, giving him no peace. Who first told me of my wife's infidelity? It was that very gypsy I met on my way to the maternity ward. But how did she know, and how could she so accurately describe details known only to me and Maria? Who is behind all this? Everything that had happened to him in the last few days was incredible, but the facts stubbornly spoke for themselves. Adrian vainly tried to remember. Had he seen this woman before? Perhaps she was watching me or Maria. But why did she decide to tell me such terrible news precisely when I was rushing to my birthing wife? Adrian stopped at the corner of the street, leaning against the wall of a building. His hands trembled, his heart pounded so hard it felt like it could burst from his chest. Various scenarios raced through his mind. Maybe it was a coincidence, an unfortunate accident, or perhaps someone specifically wanted to harm him and his family and had been harboring this sinister blackmail plan for a long time. Could it have been business competitors deciding to remove their family from the scene in such a bizarre way? Adrian decided that he needed to get to the bottom of this. He couldn't just leave everything to chance. Returning home, he sat down at his computer and started searching for information about gypsies, prophecies, and similar subjects. But the more he read, the less he found answers. Then he decided to take a different approach. He began asking acquaintances, friends, neighbors, if anyone had seen this woman, if they had heard anything unusual or suspicious. But no one could help him. They all just shook their heads and advised him to forget about it. Finally, he remembered his old friend Antonio, who was into all sorts of paranormal nonsense. Adrian often used to make fun of him, but now he was ready to believe any esoteric nonsense if it seemed even remotely logical in his situation. Antonio picked up the phone after the second ring. His voice sounded tired but friendly. "Hello, Adrian. Long time no talk. How are you?" Adrian tried to hide his anxiety, but it broke through in his voice. "Antonio, hello. You know, something strange happened. I met a gypsy woman who made a prediction for me. And now I can't calm down. Do you happen to know who she might be?" Antonio paused for a second, then said, "A gypsy, you say? Well, these things happen. Maybe it's just a coincidence, or she wanted to scare you to extort money. The latter seems most likely to me. Though, you know, a couple of years ago I heard a story about a gypsy fortune teller. They say she has a real gift of foresight. People specifically come to her from far away." Hearing this, Adrian's heart started to beat faster. "Do you remember what her name is? Or where she lives?" Antonio thought for a moment, then replied, "I think her name was Magdalena. Something like that. She lives somewhere on the outskirts of town, in an old house at the edge of the forest. Locals are scared of her, but many believe she can predict the future." Adrian felt this was the information he had been looking for. He thanked Antonio and hung up the phone. Now he had a goal, to find this Magdalena and learn the truth. The next morning, Adrian got up very early and set out. He drove along narrow country roads, passing small villages and fields, and soon found himself at the edge of the forest, where they had stopped with the driver in the rain. Sure enough, among the old trees stood a leaning cottage. It was indeed Magdalena's house. Tired from the long drive, the traveler got out of the car and headed to the house. Approaching, he noticed that there was no door, just an old piece of heavy fabric, similar to burlap, hanging in its place. He carefully pushed aside this curtain, which was thoroughly soaked with something slick and greasy, and entered. The room was dark and stuffy. A small fire burned in the corner, casting a weak light across the room. An old woman in black clothes sat by the fire. Her eyes gleamed in the dim light, and her face was covered with deep wrinkles. This was clearly the gypsy, but to the great disappointment of the guest, not the one he had met on the night road. "Make yourself at home, traveler," she said in a low voice. I know why you have come. You have many questions that no one can answer. You have learned a lot in the last few days, but you don't know what is true and what is false. A sword hangs over you, suspended by 2 threads. At any moment one of the threads may snap, and it is unknown which way the sword will fall. Adrian was astonished at how she could know all this, since he hadn't told her anything yet. He gathered all his courage and asked, "Who are you and how do you know all this? Did someone tell you about me?" Magdalena smiled, showing her sparse, rotten teeth. "I am Magdalena, the keeper of ancient knowledge. Prophecy is my calling. I see what is hidden from other eyes. Your future is dark and dangerous, but there is a way to change it." Adrian was silent, not knowing what to say, and Magdalena continued, "You are faced with a choice. You can accept your future as it is, or try to change it. But be careful, every decision has consequences." Adrian pondered her words. What does it mean to change the future? How is it possible? He decided to ask a direct question. What do I need to do to change my future? Magdalena stood up and approached him. Her gaze was piercing, like the blade of a knife. "You must undergo 3 trials. The first is a trial of faith, the second a trial of willpower, and the third a trial of love. If you pass all 3, you can change your fate." Adrian listened attentively, trying to remember every word. But something told him that he would not find the truth here. All these predictions sounded too abstract. Learned by bitter experience, Adrian no longer trusted anyone, so he cautiously asked the fortune teller, "And if I refuse to undergo these trials, will anything change?" "No, then everything will continue as it is, and you will no longer be able to influence the course of events. You will only be an observer. I think I'll refrain from experiments." "Let whatever happens happen," replied the guest and left this strange place. The way home felt like a drunken blur. He didn't even remember the roads properly, yet he found himself near his house. Was it real or just a hallucination from lack of sleep? Maybe I just passed out along the way, and all this nonsense was just a dream. Adrian doubted the reality of what had happened. Checking the car's readings, he confirmed that both mileage and fuel consumption had changed. So, he had indeed traveled somewhere today. Stop. Enough with the esoterics. I won't set foot near any fortune tellers again. Otherwise, I might as well end up in an asylum. Several weeks passed. Adrian tried to keep his distance from Maria and the newborn son. He felt betrayed and deceived. Seeing her son's torment, Adrian's mother could no longer keep the family secret. "Son, forgive us, your father and I, for pushing you so hard about having a grandchild," she said tearfully. "We are to blame, but believe me, we did not do it maliciously. It turns out that when your paternal grandfather fell ill, it was discovered that he had a rare genetic disease that passes through generations. And since your father truly did not have any signs of this disease, it turns out you are the carrier. That's why we wanted you to have healthy offspring as soon as possible." "And what does all this mean?" the son, still puzzled, asked. "Adrian, you are almost doomed," his mother whispered, averting her eyes. Adrian felt as if everything around him was spinning and swirling like a kaleidoscope. The news that had hit him over the last few days seemed insurmountable: loss of trust in his wife, doubts about his paternity, illness of the born child. All this was unbearable. But when his mother told him about the hereditary disease that was passed down through generations, he felt as if his world had completely collapsed. "God, why did you keep this from me?" he muttered before leaving his father's house. Adrian spent a sleepless night pondering what lay ahead. His grandfather had died young, and no one really knew the cause of his death. The disease had been secretive, only showing itself at certain moments, and now, it seemed, it was time for the next generation to confront this mystery. He suddenly remembered the strange gypsy woman who had once predicted his wife's infidelity and wondered, what if she knew about my illness too? Perhaps she was trying to warn me, to give me a chance to prepare for what was to come. Adrian decided to find her again. Strangely, he couldn't find her at her home the second time. It was like some sort of devilry. He visited all the places where gypsies usually gathered, but he couldn't find her anywhere. Only after several days, when he had lost hope, she found him. The gypsy approached him on the street and said, "I knew you would come to me. You want to know the truth, don't you?" Adrian nodded, unable to speak. The gypsy took his hand and looked intently into his eyes. "You carry a disease that has been passed down from your ancestors. But know that willpower and faith can overcome any affliction. You must fight, not give up. Your son was the hope for the continuation of your line. But your wife deceived you, and now precious time has been lost." Adrian stood there, not knowing what to say. He felt his blood chill in his veins. The gypsy smiled predatorily and added, "Life is a struggle, but you are strong, and you will cope. The most important thing is not to lose faith. You can buy off fate. You will receive a sign from above, and it will be your chance and signal to act. Make sure you don't miss it." Adrian's hair stood on end at these words. The gypsy's eyes looked straight into his soul, penetrating the deepest corners of his consciousness. "Really?" he repeated softly. "What are you talking about?" The gypsy gave a slight smile. Her lips barely moved, but her eyes conveyed the wisdom of the ages. "I know everything about your illness. I saw it long before you found out. But I also saw your struggle, your doubts, your fears. You have been through a lot, and now it's time to find out what awaits you ahead." Adrian was silent, not knowing what to say to that. He hadn't expected that meeting the gypsy would bring so many revelations, but he felt he had to listen to her until the end. "Tell me," he continued, gathering courage, "what did you see? What is my future?" The gypsy stepped closer, her voice became softer, almost a whisper. "Your path is through trials. But you have already proven that you can withstand them. The disease that has been passed down in your family is not a sentence. There is a chance to defeat it, but it will require you to make a difficult choice." Adrian tensed, awaiting what would come next. "The choice between life and death," the gypsy continued. "You can either resign yourself to the disease and let it destroy your life, or take responsibility for your health and the future of your children. It will not be easy, but you have the strength to cope." Adrian felt his mind clouded by the overload of information. He tried to understand what exactly the gypsy meant, but her words seemed too enigmatic. "What should I do?" he asked, feeling his voice tremble. The gypsy placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm and soothing. "You must respond to the call from above," she murmured, her voice lulling his consciousness. "You will receive a message, and you must do what it instructs. That will be your ransom from the evil fate." Just then, a loud noise snapped him out of his sweet stupor. It seemed someone was calling the gypsy on her phone. She momentarily got distracted and released her grip on her prey. She hissed something in her dialect, then slammed down the phone, but when she turned back to continue the conversation with Adrian, he had already vanished. He had never run so fast in his life. His legs carried him as if he was barely touching the ground, as if he was flying. In those few seconds when the gypsy was distracted by the phone call, it dawned on him that he had been induced into a trance, and he was on the verge of a grand scam. In shock, Adrian headed to an old country house. He wanted to hide away from prying eyes. "I hope, at least here, no one will bother me," Adrian sighed. Wandering around the old cottage for about half an hour, he found bottles of wine stashed away by his father. Out of boredom and melancholy, Adrian sipped some wine and found it quite decent. "Just one more glass, and then I'm off to bed," he commanded himself. But after the second glass came a third, then a fourth. Adrian consoled himself that he began drinking to drown out the pain and memories, and soon he was talking to himself and feeling sorry for himself, because obviously, no one could pity and understand you better than yourself. Glasses followed one after another, and alcohol gradually clouded Adrian's mind. The world around him became blurry, sounds muted, and thoughts disordered. Adrian sat in a chair, staring at the wall and reminiscing about the past, flipping through scenes from his life as if they were old photographs. How did it come to this? He whispered, rocking in time with his own thoughts. Everything was fine, and then everything went awry. His hand mechanically reached for the bottle, but suddenly he paused, tuning in to something inside himself. The gypsy's voice echoed in his ears again, her warning about the choice between life and death, as if she were standing next to him, looking at him with silent reproach. "What are you doing, Adrian?" it seemed she was asking. "Do you want to give up? Cast aside your fears, take responsibility for your life." These words, like a cold shower, brought him to his senses. He abruptly rose from the chair, barely keeping his balance, and looked at the bottle with disdain. "Enough," he exclaimed, throwing the bottle into the trash bin. "I will not allow myself to drown in this mire." Adrian staggered to the bathroom and turned on the cold water tap. A stream of icy water hit his face, bringing him back to reality. Adrian exhaled, feeling the fog in his head recede. "I need to change something," he said, looking at his reflection in the mirror. "I can't live like this." But it was too late to make any decisions, and his head hadn't completely cleared from the wine he had drunk heavily. Morning is wiser than evening, Adrian decided, and passed out completely. The next morning he woke up late with a terrible headache from a horrific hangover. "God, this homemade wine is awful," he grimaced. "There's a ringing in my head, my throat is dry, and I feel terribly sick. Why did I drink so much yesterday? Lord, forgive me, a sinner, but right now I'm ready to sell my soul for a pack of aspirin." With nothing better to do, Adrian started rummaging through old accumulated stuff in the hopes of finding at least one coveted aspirin tablet, but everything but what he needed turned up. Among a pile of junk, he stumbled upon a box with letters. Adrian opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were letters neatly tied with a ribbon. He removed the ribbon and picked up the first letter. It was addressed to someone named Lily. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Opening the envelope, Adrian pulled out a sheet of paper and began to read, and froze, holding the letter. His paternal grandmother was named Lily, and this letter could have been addressed to her. His head spun with the realization that his family was not as righteous as he had known it. God, it's like an endless soap opera. Adrian exhaled. First, I'm not the father of my son, and now my grandfather isn't my father's father. What kind of charade have they decided to play up there? And most importantly, why? Stop the earth, I want to get off. Adrian was on the brink of madness. The paternity of his grandfather, whom he had always considered his progenitor, was now in question. This news overturned all of Adrian's notions about his family and his origins. He only remembered his grandfather from photographs because he had died early and Adrian had never met him. And now Adrian understood that much remained unsaid. Why didn't grandmother ever talk about it? He muttered in confusion. So many years have passed since grandfather died, she could have at least lifted the veil on the family secret. And Adrian decided to find answers to his questions. He started going through the remaining letters, hoping to find any hints at the truth. In one of the letters, he found a mention of a man named Ion, who apparently was a friend of the family. Perhaps he was his father's real father. Adrian gathered all the letters and left the old cottage. He needed to speak to someone who could shed light on this story. The only person he could turn to was his mother. She knew the grandmother better than anyone else. When Adrian arrived home, his mother immediately noticed his distressed state. He told her everything he had learned and showed her the letters. "Mom, just don't say you knew all this and hid it from me. I can't take another betrayal from you," the son warned. His mother listened attentively, then sighed and said, "Son, let's think rationally. If I had known about this, why would your father and I have needed to pressure you to have a child as soon as possible? It would have been unnecessary. There's no logic in that. Well, I agree with that. But could Grandma not have even mentioned this incident? Adrian asked his mother. And you and Dad had no suspicions about it? I had no idea about this. My mother-in-law, God rest her soul, never even hinted at anything like that. I could never have imagined that Valerio was not Vito's son. It seems Lily decided to take this secret to the grave, confiding only in some friend whose name we don't even know. But why didn't she tell at least my father? He deserved to know the truth. Adrian asked. Probably because she didn't want to upset him, Olivia speculated. For her, family was sacred, and she didn't want to disrupt the harmony. But think about it. Valerio was convinced that Vito was his father. He loved and respected him as a parent. And then suddenly someone comes along and tells him that this is not his real father, but some uncle from the street. How would you react to such news? Yes, you're right, the son agreed. Adrian pondered his mother's words. He now understood why his grandmother had always been so secretive and rarely spoke about her past. She probably didn't want to remember those times when her life was full of secrets and misunderstandings. We just need to bring Dad into this secret. Will you tell him, or should I talk to him man to man? The son asked his mother. Let's tell him together. I think I'll need your support, his mother replied quietly. When Valerio returned from the office, puzzled faces of his son and wife awaited him at home. What's going on? He immediately sensed that something unusual had happened. Dear, sit down. We need to have a difficult conversation, his wife requested. Maybe I should change first, unless you want me. Straight from the ship to the ball, the head of the house tried to joke. You'll have time for that later. What we have to tell you can't wait, his wife explained. You've piqued my interest, replied the husband, sitting down with them in the living room armchair. Well, go ahead, don't keep me in suspense. What's happened that's so super important that I can't even change? Here. Please read this. Olivia handed her husband his mother's correspondence. Valerio scanned the handwritten lines on the paper. The more he read, the gloomier his expression became. After some time, Valerio sighed heavily, placing the sheets on the coffee table near the chair. The family patriarch ran his hand over his forehead as if trying to erase the looming shadows of the past. His eyes narrowed, a look of concern emerged. This is serious, he finally said, looking at Olivia. If this is true, the consequences could be unpredictable. Olivia nodded, understanding that the situation required immediate discussion. I understand, she replied, but what can we do? We could discuss it with your mother, but unfortunately, we are too late. She's unlikely to answer us from the other side, and I don't believe in seances. Valerio was silent for a while, weighing the possible courses of action. Then he resolutely stood up from the table. Where are the envelopes from all these letters? His father asked, his voice sounding very concerned. Here they are, in the box. Why? What do you need them for? The son asked back. Give them to me. There are clearly missing links in this puzzle. I'll try to find them. Having almost given up on finding new clues after going through nearly all the envelopes, Valerio suddenly discovered a strange paper roll in the last one. And what is this? He exclaimed. Unfolding the paper, Valerio saw a lock of someone's hair. The paper inside was written in a familiar female handwriting. It was his mother Lilia's. The note contained the following: a police officer I know told me that in America they conduct some tests that determine whether a man is the father of a child or not. I hope that someday we will have such studies here too, and the truth will be established. These are the hairs of my lawful husband, Vito. So, these hairs in the envelope are from my now deceased father? Valerio muttered in confusion. Maybe Mom thought I might want to know the truth someday and left me a clue. The family council unanimously decided to urgently send the biological material from the father and the grandfather's hair found in the envelope for comparative genetic testing. When the results of the test were on the table a couple of weeks later, the whole family fell into deep silence. No one expected the truth to be so unexpected and shocking. But along with it came relief. All fears and uncertainties disappeared like fog under the rays of the sun. Adrian's father Valerio was the first to break the silence. "Well, son, it seems our story turned out to be more complicated than we thought. But the main thing is that everything is in its place now, no more doubts and fears. Your health and our business are no longer threatened, thank God." Adrian's mother Olivia nodded, taking her son's hand in hers. "Yes, that's right. It's important that we remain a family, no matter what. That's the most valuable thing. Together, we can overcome any problem because what matters most is your health, and it's, knock on wood, excellent." Adrian looked at his parents and felt a weight lift off his chest. Everything that had seemed fatal and frightening just a few days ago suddenly lost its mystical power over him. The darkness receded, giving way to light. The love and support of close people was something no one could ever take away from them. "You have no idea what a relief this is," exclaimed the son, embracing his parents. "It's just something. I thought I was going mad and couldn't wake up, seeing a nightmare. It was too incredible to be true. Everything piling up, one thing after another, under which I was simply suffocating." In the following days, the family spent a lot of time together, discussing the past and making plans for the future. They decided that no one outside would know about these discoveries. "Let this information remain our family secret. It must not leak beyond the walls of this house," the head of the family concluded the meeting, and everyone agreed, as these details were clearly not for outsiders' ears. From that day on, the clouds that had hung over the Navarro family finally dispersed. Everything started to fall into place, as if by the wave of a magic wand. The family business, managed by Valerio with his son's help, continued to thrive. After the trials they had endured, the family relationships became even stronger. All the efforts directed at protecting the company turned out to be unnecessary. However, Adrian realized that his interest in the business had increased after this event. He wanted to dive deeper into managing the company to contribute to its development. Adrian even proposed an idea for expanding the business, which his father approved. One evening, sitting in a cozy living room, Adrian and Valerio discussed the future of the company. Pleased with his son's successes, Valerio proposed that he lead a new business direction. "Son," he began, "you have proven yourself a true fighter not only in your personal life, but also at work. I want you to head our new division. It involves innovative technologies and the development of environmentally friendly products. It's a promising area, and I'm confident you can handle it." Adrian was pleasantly surprised by his father's offer. He had always dreamed of contributing to the family business, but did not expect it to happen so soon. "Dad, I'm flattered by your trust," he responded, feeling pride swell in his chest. "I will put in every effort to meet your expectations." Valerio smiled, patted his son on the shoulder. "I have no doubts about you. You are a strong person, and you have all the qualities to be a successful leader." Olivia, who had been watching the conversation, approached her son and hugged him tenderly. "You deserve this, dear," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "You've gone through so much, and now it's time to reap the rewards." Adrian hugged his mother and gratefully looked at his parents. He felt his existence finally gaining meaning and stability. Months passed, and life returned to its usual course. Adrian often thought about how things could have turned out differently if he hadn't found those letters. But now he was sure that everything had happened as it should have. The family was stronger, and he was wiser and stronger. One evening, sitting by the fireplace in the old country house, Adrian opened the box with the letters again. He carefully flipped through the pages, reading the lines written by his grandmother and other family members. These letters had become a reminder of how important the connection between generations was and the importance of preserving memories of one's roots. Now that all secrets were revealed, Adrian looked to the future with confidence and hope. He knew that new challenges and discoveries awaited him, but he was ready for them. His loved ones were always by his side. "Grandma, you really threw us a curveball," Adrian said, looking at an old faded photo of Lilia on the mantel. If I had known what a prankster you were, I would have listened to your advice more often. You must have been splitting your sides laughing at us from heaven." The only unresolved issue in Adrian's life was his marriage to the scheming Maria. As soon as it was clear his health was in order, he filed for divorce while simultaneously contesting paternity of the recently born child. After some deliberation, Adrian decided it was time to end a relationship that had long ceased to bring joy. He could no longer tolerate the lies and betrayal, especially after learning that the child Maria had given birth to might not be his. Having prepared the necessary documents, he went to a legal consultation. The lawyer he consulted listened attentively to his story and explained the steps necessary for the divorce and paternity dispute. "You will need to undergo DNA testing," the lawyer said. "It's the only reliable way to prove that you are not the biological father of the child. Unfortunately, your wife's words and testimonies will not be enough for the court. Plus, there's no guarantee she won't retract her statements during the court proceedings, so it's best to come prepared with the results of the test. If necessary, the court may order a forensic examination to ensure the reliability of the independent analysis." Adrian agreed. The procedure took several weeks, but the result was unequivocal: the child was not his biological offspring. Independent genetic and subsequent judicial examinations confirmed that the boy was not his son. Thus, another burden fell from Adrian's shoulders, and his heart a flicker of hope that his wife had indeed deceived him to hurt him more profoundly. But life put everything in its place, and he had no intention of burdening himself with raising another man's child from an unfaithful wife. This news was both a relief and a source of bitterness for Adrian. On one hand, he was freed from the responsibility for another man's child. On the other, he realized that his marriage had irrevocably collapsed. The divorce was not easy. Maria, recovering from postpartum depression, changed tactics and tried to persuade Adrian to change his decision, claiming that everything could be fixed, saying she had meant well. "Adrian, I did all this for you. The doctor said we had almost no chance of conceiving a child within the specified time frame, so I took this desperate step. But I wasn't just trying for myself." Adrian was silent, his thoughts racing in search of an answer. He didn't know what to think or how to react. Maria's words cut through his heart, but also caused confusion. He couldn't tell if she was acting with the best intentions or just concocting a new excuse to evade responsibility. Either way, the deception and schemes behind his back had left a deep mark on his soul. "Maria," he began, carefully choosing his words, "I understand that you may have wanted the best, but deception isn't the solution. We should have solved our problems together, honestly and openly. You presented me with a fait accompli, and now I don't know how I can ever trust you again." Maria lowered her head, tears dropping onto her knees. Either she truly regretted her actions, realizing she had made a mistake, or she was a brilliant actress. One thing was clear: Maria hoped Adrian could forgive her. "Please forgive me," she whispered. "I really thought I was doing this for our future. I love you, and the child is innocent in all this, too innocent to be punished like this. He's the most innocent in this whole story. Give us a chance to fix everything." Adrian stood up and walked to the window, staring out for a long time, trying to gather his thoughts. Questions swirled in his head. How to move forward? Can trust be restored? What will happen to their family? And then a reckless idea struck him. "Well, you're setting the bed soft, but expecting to sleep tight," he scoffed. "What are you talking about, Adrian?" Maria made eyes as innocent as a lamb. "I don't understand you." "How could you forget?" the husband sneered. "In all this story, there are missing pieces. You completely forgot that something went wrong with your accomplice, and your lover started blackmailing me. Wasn't he the one who sent that message demanding money in exchange for silence about the child not being mine?" Adrian asked. "He wanted to make a quick buck," Maria hissed through clenched teeth, baring her fangs. "I told that fool to wait a bit. But no, he couldn't wait to get the money. Now we're both left high and dry. That proves it." Adrian smirked, pleased with himself for having so cleverly exposed this trickster. Only one thing frightened him. He completely did not know his own wife, with whom he had lived side by side for several years. After what had been revealed, Adrian was resolute. He knew he could not trust her again, even if she repented for what she had done. Nor did he want to spend years trying to rebuild broken trust. Whatever your real intentions were, you deceived everyone, and it was primarily your greed that drove you, Adrian finally told his wife. A few months later, the court granted the divorce. Officially, Adrian was no longer bound by marriage to Maria or by legal paternity to the newborn child. Let the real father be held accountable for the fruit of their love or cooperation. I don't know what drove them, but frankly, I don't care. Let them all go to hell and stay out of my life. Adrian gained his freedom, but with it came a sense of emptiness. For some time after, he avoided socializing with friends and colleagues, preferring to spend his evenings alone, reflecting on his life and future plans. Days passed unbearably slowly, and each evening Adrian returned to his empty apartment, where the only sound was the tick-tock of the clock on the wall. He no longer felt the need to rush anywhere or achieve new successes. Instead, his thoughts often wandered to the past, analyzing every detail of his relationship with Maria, evaluating his past decisions and actions. Sometimes he sat at the computer and spent hours looking at old photos where they had been happy together. These moments reminded him of what their family had been and made him wonder what could have gone wrong. In these memories, he found comfort, but also pain. My whole life's a sham, he gritted through his teeth, repeatedly scrutinizing the photographs. One evening, as Adrian sat on the couch, tired of his own thoughts, an old friend, Sergio, called him. They hadn't spoken for several years, but Sergio had apparently heard about the divorce and decided to reach out. "Hey, Adrian." Sergio began cheerfully. "Long time no see. How are you?" Adrian was at a loss for words. He wasn't used to sharing his troubles, especially with someone he hadn't seen in a long time. "Fine," he replied curtly. "And you?" Sergio talked about his life, his new job, and his future plans. Adrian listened, but his attention was scattered. Suddenly, Sergio suggested they meet. "Listen, let's get together this evening, sit down, talk, reminisce about the old times," he suggested. Adrian hesitated. He hadn't been out of the house for a long time, and his desire to interact with anyone was minimal. But something in Sergio's voice reminded him of the times when they were young and carefree. "All right," he agreed. "Let's meet tomorrow evening at our old cafe." The next day, Adrian arrived at the appointed place. The cafe had changed little since they last visited, the same wooden tables, the same lamps with shades creating a cozy atmosphere. Sergio was already waiting for him, sitting at a table with 2 mugs of beer. "Good to see you, buddy," Sergio said, standing up and giving Adrian a strong hug. "It's been ages." Adrian smiled, feeling the warmth of his old friend's embrace. They sat down, and the conversation quickly began, first about small talk and news, but gradually they moved on to more serious topics. "Listen," Sergio started, "I heard you've had some changes in your life. Divorce is always hard. How are you coping?" Adrian hesitated for a moment, but then decided to open up. He told Sergio everything that had happened, about his feelings, his doubts, and the sense of emptiness that lingered. His friend listened attentively, occasionally nodding and taking a sip of beer. When Adrian finished, Sergio looked at him sympathetically. "You know, Adrian," he said, "life is complicated. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions, but the important thing is not to stop. Find something that inspires you, something that gives you a purpose. It could be a new hobby, sports, or even work. The main thing is to move forward." Adrian pondered his friend's words. He understood that Sergio was right. You can't stay in the past forever. You need to look for new paths and new goals. The evening flew by unnoticed, and as they parted, Adrian felt a little lighter. Meeting with an old friend reminded him that life goes on and that there are always people ready to support you in tough times. The next morning, Adrian woke up with new thoughts. He decided to take up sports, as Sergio had suggested. The gym became a place where he could distract himself from his problems and channel his energy in the right direction. Gradually, he began to feel better physically and mentally. Soon Adrian began to understand that life really does go on, and you need to move forward to avoid turning into a decayed stump covered in moss. Adrian also resumed communication with close people and even wrote on social media to his former girlfriend Claudia, whom he had once broken up with because of Maria. Maria had managed to turn his head, but now he remembered it all as if through a fog, as if someone had bewitched him or something. What if Maria was a gypsy herself and mastered the technique of tactile hypnosis and other tricks? Adrian wondered. I never saw her parents. She said she was an orphan, and I didn't check. This thought suddenly pierced Adrian's consciousness, making him wonder. Indeed, he had never seen Maria's parents. She always said she was an orphan, and he, smitten with her, did not verify this information. Now that everything had fallen into place, Adrian began to doubt that Maria had been sincere with him. He remembered how easily she manipulated his feelings, how skillfully she created the illusion of a perfect relationship. Recalling their first meeting, Adrian suddenly realized she had behaved rather strangely. Their acquaintance occurred in a cafe, where Maria accidentally bumped into him, supposedly having lost her wallet. He helped her, and she immediately asked him out on a date. It all seemed too perfect to be true. Adrian decided to conduct a little investigation. He started gathering information about Maria, trying to find any lead. It turned out her past was shrouded in mystery. There was not a single real piece of evidence about her life before meeting him. Even the photographs she showed him seemed staged. All this made Adrian think that his ex-wife might indeed have had some hidden skills of manipulation. Perhaps she used hypnosis or other psychological techniques to make him fall in love with her and marry her, or she was a professional marriage scammer. Doesn't get any easier, he muttered to himself as yet another attempt to dig up info on his ex-wife ended in failure. Adrian shared his suspicions with Claudia, who by then had agreed to resume their friendship. She listened to him attentively and supported the idea of continuing the investigation. Adrian seized this opportunity to reconnect with Claudia, but it seemed she was also eager to do so. Soon, they decided to meet to discuss everything one-on-one. Claudia had no trouble accepting the invitation to meet. They agreed to meet at a cozy cafe near Adrian's house. When Claudia entered, Adrian immediately noticed that she had changed. She was more confident. Her walk, posture, and demeanor all screamed it. And her eyes simply shone. "Hi, Adrian," said Claudia, smiling. "Glad to see you." "Hello, Claudia." "Thanks for coming," Adrian replied, inviting her to sit at a table. Claudia sat opposite him. For a few minutes, he just silently admired his former girlfriend. "God, what a fool I was," he finally managed to say. "Where were my eyes looking? How could I voluntarily give you up?" Claudia looked down shyly, and when she looked up again, her eyes were veiled with a shadow, as if dark thoughts about the tragic past had clouded their crystal brightness. "Claudia, please forgive me, if you can," Adrian began hurriedly, taking her hands. "Honestly, I wouldn't forgive myself. It would be hard to find a bigger jerk. But you're not me, so I can't help but tempt fate and ask for your forgiveness in hopes of your leniency." "Adrian," she said breathlessly. "Wait, hear my confession first," Adrian interrupted her. "Consider me a spineless creature, a rag, and you'd be right. But even criminals have the right to atone for their sins and seek forgiveness. I tried to remember the details of my interactions with Maria, you know, at the beginning when she took me away from you. Strange as it sounds, but still. You understand, I really feel like a bull led to slaughter. It's all like a fog, as if it wasn't really happening to me, as if I was watching a dream or a movie." His companion silently listened as Adrian told her about his suspicions regarding Maria. When he finished, Claudia thoughtfully nodded. "You know, Adrian, I've thought about that too," she admitted. "When we broke up, I was shocked, but then I realized something was off. Your choice seemed inexplicable to me. Now I think it could have been manipulation. There are so many techniques on the internet nowadays, easy to learn, especially if one has natural abilities. It's not out of the question that Maria has gypsy roots, and maybe her relatives staged that drama to completely confuse and scare you, to extort money from you. Good thing you didn't give them anything right away, but talk to your parents first. These words confirmed Adrian's fears, and he felt he was on the right track. Together with Claudia, they decided to dig deeper and try to uncover all of Maria's secrets. Over time, Adrian and Claudia grew close again. A common goal united and bonded them. And then, almost without noticing, they continued their relationship without really trying to untangle the web spun by Maria. You know, Adrian, God be her judge. She's already got her dues. Her child was born sick. That can also be seen as karmic punishment. Claudia said one day, not without a hint of sadness in her voice. Let's not spend our whole lives chasing this elusive Maria. God has already punished her. Now she has to carry that cross for the rest of her life. I've thought about that too, Adrian confessed to her. I just feared you wouldn't understand me, would judge me for cowardice. After all, I already turned away from you because of her once. That was a temporary clouding of judgment. Who brings up the old, loses an eye. Claudia smiled and hugged her beloved man, who finally, after a long time, was wholly hers again. Together they finally drove away the ghosts of the past. Claudia helped Adrian through the tough times and restored his faith in himself. They were now building their own plans for the future, dreaming of traveling together and even thinking about starting a family. A year after the divorce, Adrian finally felt that he had closed a painful chapter of his life. He learned to forgive, to let go of the past, and to open himself to new possibilities and experiences. Most importantly, he learned to appreciate what he has, protecting his bird in hand instead of chasing after cranes in the sky.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.